Hello everyone and welcome to Whisky Wednesday. This week we're looking at something a bit more unusual. It's heavily peated cask strength Indian whiskey. It comes in at 62.8%, but there's a couple of key factors to cover before we start tasting or smelling it. Obviously India's a pretty warm country. They lose a lot of liquid to evaporation per year. It's anywhere between 10 to 12% a year. So by the time the thing's 4 or 5 years old, they've nearly lost half the barrel. One thing you do have to remember as whiskey drinkers is that this is a business. People do have to make money. People do make a living off it. So they do bottle these whiskies at 4.5 and 5 years old. But whiskey flavour is all about cask influence and how you get that cask influence. So if you've got more heat, the whiskey is automatically going to have a little bit more involvement with the barrel. And as you can see by the colour on this whiskey, which you'll see in some of the cutaway shots, it is particularly dark. So that's point one. Point two, not a lot of peat in India. So the barley they use for this whiskey is actually imported from Europe. I don't say Scotland, it is peated in Scotland, but there's a lot of barley grown in Scotland, France, Russia. All barley that is used to make Scottish whiskey isn't necessarily grown in Scotland. So that's just an interesting factor for you. It is Indian whiskey. Amrut's based in Bangalore. As you can see from the label, there's a nice picture of Mount Everest on the front of it. The barley they source for their whiskies, not this one, but for their regular whiskies that they distill themselves, they source the barley from the lower parts of the Himalayas. It's actually grown in like a dry state by monks, so I'm not sure if they know what the overall end result is for their barley, but it's now in booze. This is peated in its cask strength. Two words that do a lot for marketing on bottles of whiskey, and that's kind of all the fun, all the little facts and knowledge for you. So we'll just get on with smelling and tasting it and see what it's about. For something that's 62.8% and is heavily peated, it's not a huge smell. The thing it reminds me the most is like coffee, like coffee liqueurs. A bit of orange in there. If you like your old-fashioned cocktails, it's got a little bit of that going on. It's a little bit bitter, it's a little bit sweet. You get a lot of alcohol. Like I say, it's only 4.5 years old and it is nearly 63%, so you should be expecting quite a lot of that anyway. Bit of coffee, oranges, a little bit of dark chocolate, a little bit of salt. Not loads of smoke. Let's give it a taste and see what's going on. Now this thing's kind of like a depth charge going off in your mouth. It covers all the layers of your tongue with bourbon cask sweetness. One thing I didn't mention is it's all matured in first and second fill bourbon barrels, much like Glenmorangie. And as that sweetness kind of dies away, salt, spice, really kind of dry barrel char, and then just this kind of wave of smoke comes up from the back. It's only after you swallow it and you take a shallow breath in, that's when you really get the peat coming through. And it's not powerful. I'd say it's probably no more than like a Bowmore or a Talisker. So it's nothing particularly, it's not a Lagavulin or an Ardbeg, it's quite balanced. Let's have another go. Second sip, there's more sweetness. And that is kind of like the vanilla, the honey, the sponge cake, the creams, all those kind of typical bourbon flavours. And then it's just counterbalanced nicely by this little bit of smoke, this little bit of salt. It's just something a little bit interesting, a bit different. A lot of people do complain about New World whiskey finishes, specifically from India and Taiwan, some Japanese whiskey too. That is just the amount of cask that's in it for such a young style. This isn't spirit driven in any way. There's a big cask influence. And I saw a factor somewhere the other day which said 1 year in Taiwan is the equivalent of 7 years aging in Scotland, and 1 year in India is the equivalent of 5. So this is 4.5 to 5 years old. So you're looking at something that's, in theory, the same taste profile as a 20 to a 25-year-old Scottish whiskey, due to oak influence. And I don't get a lot of smoke. And with older peated Scottish whiskies, you don't get a lot of smoke. So on that basis, I do have to agree with that. Outside of all the chat about aging and cask selection and that kind of thing and wood influence, I really like it. I like the whole Amrut range. The single malt's fantastic. The fusion's really interesting. They do a couple of experimental sherry and port cask finishes. I was talking about this at a whiskey festival a couple of weeks ago, and it was the standout of the entire range. People loved it. I think we went through about 3 bottles in 45 minutes. It was that good. In terms of scoring it, I think there's like a solid 8.5. It's just under about 90 quid a bottle, which is a lot, not going to deny that. But I think if you've tried the myriad of Scotches, Irish, bourbon, Japanese, and you want to go for something different and you want to spend a little bit more money than usual, I think this is something that's worth adding to your collection. It's just something that's a little bit out there, and they're a great distillery. I think a lot of people look at these new world distilleries and think, can't be good if it's not Scotch or Irish, but that's not necessarily the case anymore. There's some amazing new world whiskey, and this is certainly one of them. So thank you all for watching. I've been Phil, this is the Whiskey Jar, and that is an 8.5 out of 10. Thank you.